the seizing of the sanctioned oil tankers, the U.S. energy quarantine of Venezuela, that along with the U.S. planning to control future sales of oil from the country, and then taking in the money and splitting it between the U.S. and Venezuela. What is that about? What is the kind of end goal here?
So
who benefits by all of this?
It's unclear. You have an extraordinary action taken by the United States of America as a direction by President Donald Trump to remove President Maduro from Venezuela, quite literally, remove him, which in normal times would seemingly leave some sort of a vacuum. But we did quickly see the vice president step in and take over.
A friend to the oil industry, as we know.
Right. And the question has been, what do we do with the oil? What do we do with the natural resources? The real question is, what about the oil, right? And we've seen all the actions that you saw play out. What we've seen in the 4 or 5 days since is a lot of, here are the ideas that we have over how we're going to handle the infrastructure of the oil. And we've been talking to oil majors like ConocoPhillips and Exxon and Chevron, but it's a lot of talk. It's not a lot of clear action.
How does it typically work when it comes to natural resources? You've spent years covering metals and mining, for example. How does a split typically work when it comes to natural resources when a company that is maybe from another country goes and extracts those natural resources from a different country?
There's all sorts of different things. There's like, you have taxes. So like, okay, you have to pay a certain amount of tax, like nickel in Indonesia, for example. Years ago, it used to be the Chinese would just extract nickel out of Indonesia, bring it back to China and process it. The government got smart, call it 12 years ago, and said, okay, well, the value add is the processing. So you can continue to extract, but you also have to process within the nation. And so there are certain fees or taxes that go along with that so that the state can actually say to its taxpayers, to its citizens, we are making money off of this as well, even though it is an extractive industry. Thinking of it this way is a fair way to think of how different nations work with foreign corporations that are in big extractive industries.
Well, let me ask the question in a more extreme way then, because I think there would be some people who perhaps are watching or listening right now saying, okay, well, if this is if this oil is in Venezuela, it belongs to Venezuela and its people. What right does the United States have to take that oil?
Right. I think there are a lot of fair legal, philosophical arguments that are probably ahead of us. I think that's a really important thing to point out. Like, this is uncharted territory. And while it seems like a plan is being developed by the United States and by Venezuela and by others, it is not clear what that plan is. Obviously, we hear the energy secretary saying today, well, it's going to be split and it's going to go into U.S. accounts, and we'll kind of oversee those accounts and make sure the money gets to who rightly should be getting that money. But like, how are they going to execute that?
So that $2.8 billion at current market price of the 30 to 50 million barrels of oil from Venezuela to the U.S. We're not saying like half of it goes to the U.S. government. I mean, doesn't Chevron own it, or who gets that money? Because that's where I think people are saying, is this transactional?
Right. Chevron is the only oil major actively operating in Venezuela right now.
Correct.
The reporting that we had today was that there are talks to try to get ConocoPhillips and Exxon back into the country to also help develop the oil deposits. They're talking about everything from developing to infrastructure. I mean, we have quoted one of the Rice University professors who says, to do this, we're talking like $10 billion a year that has to be spent to build this out. And then your question is, but okay, say it happens, who's getting the money? Well, it's hard to understand. If the energy secretary is saying it's going to be split, there are obvious questions in the market that you are asking right now. How does it get split? What do those accounts look like? Who actually controls them? Like, the question I have is, the United States president currently has a golden share over United States Steel. He has shown that he will, on certain things, have direct say, one individual. And so he said, I will take these accounts. So will he? I don't know.
I want to, roll into this Greenland, because we did have the president talking about that. European leaders issuing a joint statement warning that President Trump needs to respect the territorial integrity of Greenland and Denmark. I do wonder, it almost feels like, is this kind of like the British Empire that the U.S. is looking to be in terms of natural resources? or is that the wrong read on it? Like, how do you see it? Like, again, and I go back to, is this transactional? The president wants one thing, gonna get it, and then back off.
Here's my read on Greenland. Greenland is part of the Western Hemisphere in our national security strategy. Venezuela is part of the Western Hemisphere in our national security strategy. Questions came up to the president over the weekend. If you're doing this with Venezuela, what about other things? And the president mentions Greenland. Greenland has not been discussed by the president of the United States since the summer.
Right.
It was striking that he brought up Greenland, and we've seen all the news that's come out. The Danish officials who have said, whoa, 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 the points that, hey, if the United States launched an attack on Greenland, that would effectively end NATO. I think we need to pump our brakes for a second, see what plays out. We do know that the president of the United States sometimes is a little bit loose with his words. But behind his words, there is some meaning. And I think the market's trying to find out, what is that meaning? I think European officials are trying to figure out, what is that meaning? And I do bring it back to connecting the dots. The president is not telling us directly why he's talking about Greenland. But there is a connection of, this is part of the Western Hemisphere. And he just had, in his mind, a massive victory of extracting the president of Venezuela and apprehending him, bringing him back to the United States. So on some level, don't forget, Greenland has always been a priority for President Donald Trump. It's just that lately, it hasn't been at the top of the pile.